Welcome to Hope Possible Ministries. Shalom. Okay, so this week we are going to continue the 70 weeks prophecy teaching. Last time we covered why the 70 weeks prophecy has not yet been fully fulfilled. There are some things that have come to pass, like Jesus coming to make a reconciliation for sins. That's taken place, but there are also parts that have not taken place, right? And until all the parts have taken place, until then can we only say that it has fully come to pass. So there are still some future aspects of the 70 weeks prophecy found in Daniel. Of course, it is a prophecy given by the angel Gabriel. Gabriel is the one who gave that prophecy. Daniel actually heard it, and he wrote it down, but with his ears, right? Not that he, like a prophet hears from God through the Spirit and says, "Thus saith the Lord." That's not how this prophecy came about. It was actually an angel speaking to Daniel, and he heard it with his actual ears as he's talking to this angel. So that's how that prophecy has come to pass. That's why we have it. And it has not been fully fulfilled. So we covered all of that pretty good detail last time. Okay, so now we're going to cover the other half of that. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to drink water. Better watch out coughing and stuff like that these days. They might put you in prison for it. Okay, so let's see what we got. Take me just a few seconds here. Besides, it probably gives some time for people to. I do these teachings live, so it gives people a chance to get in there before I get started. All right. I guess a lot of times I assume that people are just going to watch it on the recording instead of watching it live, but there are people who do watch live, so that's a blessing. Okay. Come on now. Okay, so let's go back to Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 through 27. Daniel 9, 25 through 27. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the Prince that shall come, but not for himself, and the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is there are actually three different time periods listed here that we just read. A lot of times when people are teaching on this, they always group it up into two time periods. You know, the 69 weeks all grouped together, and then the final week separated apart. Well, there's three time periods here, not two. And I think this is where people get into problems when they're doing Bible chronology. You know, a Bible chronology is basically where you go back to the beginning, back to Genesis, and you start from there, and using the information, try to figure out how old is the universe? How long have we been here? Right? And you count from that point forward, like, you know, this person begat this person when they were this old, and you add up all these ages at these different intervals, and you can get a timeline, and you can get a basic age of the universe. All right, so it's Bible chronology. And a lot of times this is used in Bible chronology, right? You have to use this, but the problem is people group it together, the first two time periods. We see that the first time period here is a time period that says 7 weeks. Now, if the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks were supposed to be added together, they would have been. Okay? I don't know why people overlook this. It just seems so obvious and so simple that if it was supposed to be 69 weeks, it would have said 69 weeks. But it doesn't say that. It says 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Two different time periods, right? They're two different time periods. So actually what we have is three time periods. We have 7 weeks, we have 62 weeks, and we have 1 week. All of them adding up to 70 weeks. Okay? So, you know, you might be thinking, you know, if you're not familiar with this passage, if you're not familiar with what other people have taught on it, you might be thinking, well, you know, 70 weeks, that's not very long, right? That's not very long at all. That's just, you know, it's just about a year and a half or something like that, right? But they're not actual weeks. What they are is they're weeks of years, not weeks of days. Okay, so when you see them as weeks of years, you know, each week being 7 years, and then you add up the time intervals, then what you end up with is you end up with the 7 weeks with the, you know, the year time periods there. It'd be 49 years, right? And you add up the 62 weeks, and you end up with a 483 year time period, I believe. And then, of course, the last week would be a 7-year time period. So now you have these three time periods that we're looking at. But again, they're not all scrunched together, right? They have different starting points. And that's really the key. Really the key to understanding this prophecy is understanding that each one of these time intervals has its own starting point. Its own starting point. When you understand that they have their own starting point, all you have to determine is when is that starting point going to take place. And then once it does take place, then you can start counting from that starting point, whatever that time interval happens to be. Which means that there's going to be gaps of time with, you know, between the time periods. There's going to be a starting point for the first time period of 7 weeks. Then whenever that's finished, there's going to be a gap of time, and then a second starting point for the second time period. And then whenever that is over, right, then there's another gap, and then another starting point for the final time period. Okay? And well, how are we going to find out? I mean, how can we tell what the starting points are? Well, it says right there in the passage. So we just read it. Let's take a closer look at it. It says the 7 weeks, right? So what is the starting point for the 7 weeks? Well, I believe the starting point for the 7 weeks is the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. Or more specifically, the 7 weeks time period is actually started by the declaration to rebuild the temple. The 7 week time period is for rebuilding the temple, because they are in exile, in Babylon and throughout the nations. They're in captivity, and now their captivity is about to be over, right? And their captivity is about to be over. So this first 7 weeks is to rebuild the temple that was destroyed. Okay, through Nebuchadnezzar. So that's what this first 7 weeks time period is. So it's going to happen at the going forth of the commandment to build the temple. And we do see that in the Bible as taking place. First, let's look at Isaiah 44, verse 28. Okay, it says, "That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid." So when Cyrus, this is actually before Cyrus was even born, whenever Isaiah was speaking this. But this Cyrus is going to come to power, and God's going to use this man, this sinner, God's going to use this man to do a job. Okay? Even though he's a sinner, even though he doesn't really even know who the true God is, he's following false gods, God is going to use this man anyway, and he's going to use him to do a job, even calling him my shepherd. And he shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built. Okay, so this is where we tie into the 70 weeks prophecy. That's what it says, the proclamation to rebuild Jerusalem. Thou shalt be built. But specifically, what's going to be built? It says right here in Isaiah, to the temple, and the foundation shall be laid. So now we're talking about the temple that's going to be built. Okay, specifically. So that's really interesting. So that's what's going to kick off this first 7 week time period. So let's look at also in 2 Chronicles. Second Chronicles 36. Okay, gotta move this up a little. 22 and 23. Okay, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord God of heaven given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah, who is there among you of all his people. the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. So specifically to build him a house. Well, to build God a house, that's his temple. To build the temple. Right? So specifically, the proclamation of King Cyrus is to build the temple. Okay? And I have to stress these things because people will take the proclamation of King Cyrus and they'll say that's for both these time periods. Well, it's to build the temple, but it also says build Jerusalem, so it just lump it all together, and that's the way you do it. No, it's not. That's not the way it actually goes, and we're going to get in a little bit more detail of why that's not the way it goes. But here we see that, again, his actual proclamation. Now, before Isaiah was prophesying that it would happen. And in 2 Chronicles is declaring it in real time that it is happening. That he gave the proclamation for it to happen. So in 2 Chronicles, this is not a prophecy. This is a fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah. And also Jeremiah is actually the one that's mentioned. Right? And that might be a little hard to understand. But basically what it comes down to is that this is fulfilling the prophecy of Jeremiah of the people returning to the land. That's what Jeremiah spoke, and that's what this part of 2 Chronicles is referring to. It's not negating or saying that what Isaiah said didn't take place, or it's not trying to confuse that, well, Isaiah said something that's now being attributed to Jeremiah. No. It's actually more simple than that. And it's talking about the other prophecy that Jeremiah did give for the people to return to the land after the 70 years. Okay? That they would return to the land. After, if you read into it, it talks about that the land is going to be given all of its Sabbath rests because the people were refusing to do what God told them to do. So God fulfilled all of his Sabbath rests over that 70 years for the land before they could return. And then that's what Jeremiah's prophecy was all about, is them returning at the end of that 70-year period. And so the proclamation of King Cyrus did fulfill that prophecy also. But where King Cyrus is actually named is in the prophecy of Isaiah. Okay, so it's really fulfilling both prophecies at the same time. It's just just because Isaiah is not mentioned doesn't mean it hasn't been fulfilled. Okay, it just means it wasn't mentioned. Okay, so be careful not to try to construct something from silence. Okay, I see that the prophecy from Isaiah is there, naming Cyrus by name. Then I can also look and see that the other prophecy from Jeremiah is there, and both were actually fulfilled with this one proclamation that King Cyrus made. Okay, so hopefully that clears that up a little bit. We also see Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So even though, like I said, he's a pagan and all that stuff, because God has chosen him, and apparently God has made himself known to him because he's calling out the God of Israel by name. Okay, so there was an interaction there. So King Cyrus wasn't serving him before, but okay, now he knows about the God of Israel. All right, there's an interaction there, and now he's proclaiming that he is the Lord God. Now, the word Lord here is actually his actual name, known as the Tetragrammaton. And it's the actual name of God. There's no vowels. There's no vowel marks. There's only consonants. Yod, He, Vav, He. Right? So that's the actual name of God. So here this pagan is actually naming God by his name. Okay? So I think that's pretty significant that there must have been an interaction there. God must have made himself known unto him and let him know that I am giving you all of this, but I want you to do this for me. And King Cyrus did it. Okay? And it's just that simple. But he did actually call the God of Israel by name, by his actual name. That's where we see Lord in all caps. Anytime in the Old Testament you see Lord in all caps, it's always the Tetragrammaton. It's always his actual name. Okay? It's very important. And again, it's talking about build the house of the Lord God of Israel. His house. The temple. Again, talking about the temple. So this is what the proclamation is for the building of the temple, which is really the beginning of the building of Jerusalem. Okay? So that's really just all there is to it. Yeah, it talks about the building of Jerusalem, but if you're going to build the temple, you are building in Jerusalem. So there you go. I mean, sometimes people try to parse into semantics a little bit too much, and they try to overanalyze a little bit too much, and it's really not needed in every case. Really not needed in every case. It's just really simple. So I believe this is the starting period of the 7 weeks time period. This is where the 7 weeks time period starts. The 49 years, right, for the building of the temple. Okay. But what about what we see in John? Let's go to John chapter 2. (19 through 21). And Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was the temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. Okay. But something to look at is they were saying that the temple was built in 46 years, not 49. Is that a problem? I don't believe it is a problem at all. You got to realize, the proclamation, 49 years from the proclamation that the temple will be built. From the proclamation. Well, I mean, it isn't like you jump in you're going to jump in your truck and get some flatbed trucks together and drive out and get all your building supplies at Lowe's or some home improvement store, and you're just going to build it. And you're going to start building within a week. That's not the way things worked back then. I mean, first they had to travel there, which is what Cyrus said, that they had to travel there of their own. Right now they were given a free will offering, and then anybody along the way was told to help them with either silver or gold or whatever they needed to get to where they were going. But it took some time to get to where they were, scattered throughout Babylon and in the regions, to accumulate and gather in Jerusalem to build the temple. So it took time to do that. It would have taken time to take all the silver and gold that they were given and use that to order the materials needed for building the temple. And if you go back and look at how the temple was built, there was perfectly hewn stones, but there's also a lot of wood that was used, a lot of material that was used, and had to be purchased from places like Lebanon, right? Places like that where this stuff had to be purchased and then brought in by ship. And that process takes time, right? So when you understand all of that, and they didn't have internet, they couldn't just get on their cell phone and call these people up. They couldn't make an internet order and have it delivered. It did not work that way. The processes were a lot slower, okay? So I don't see any problem at all with the difference of 49 and 46 years. 49 years from the time the proclamation was given. Okay, now you have to get everything in gear. It's going to take a while to get that together. The logistics of that back then would have been highly difficult, right? And I think it's be pretty amazing to be able to get all of that orchestrated and together and start building within 3 years. I said it'd be quite amazing. But the actual building of the temple took 46 years. I have no problem with that. Okay, it took 3 years to get there and to get the materials there and start building. Right? Okay, I don't have a problem with that. 3 years seems like a very short time to get that together. You can tell that they were in a hurry to be able to get all that together in 3 years. Okay? So I have no problem with that. So there's no discrepancy there. People will like to look at things like this and look, it's a discrepancy. No, it's not a discrepancy. It's not a discrepancy. One is from the time the proclamation was given. The other was from the time that the building started. No problem. Right? So I thought that was worth bringing up. Okay, so now we've covered the first 7-week period, the 49 years of the building of the temple. Okay, now let's go into the other part, the 62 weeks to 62 weeks, right? When does that start? Well, let's go back and let's look at the reference there in Daniel 9, and it says right there, verse 25, it says in 62 weeks. And it says, the street shall be built again and the wall, even in troublous times. So first we have the temple, and now we have the wall. Well, was there a decree, was there a proclamation that was given that allowed the wall and the streets to be built? Well, actually, yes, there was. There was a separate decree that was given, and we find that in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 2. Find it here for us. I always have a hard time finding that one. I don't know why. Oh, that's why it's way back there. Nehemiah chapter 2. And we're going to look at verses 1 through 8. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire. Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, If it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. And let a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Okay, so this is a decree that was given by Artaxerxes the king, for Nehemiah, that he'd go back and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, by this time, the temple was already built. The temple had already been built. That time period is done, and there's a gap of time. And now this other starting point marks the beginning of the second time period, the 62 weeks. Right? That marks the beginning of it. Right? And of course, it doesn't take that long. It doesn't take the 483 years for the wall and the streets to be built, for Jerusalem to be rebuilt. It doesn't take that long. But see, this time period, even though the starting point is the wall and the streets, it's not the purpose for this time period. The purpose for this time period, if we go back to Daniel 9, and it says in verse 26, And after the 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Oh, okay. So the rebuilding of the wall and the street is the beginning of this time period, but the ending of the time period is to mark the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The crucifixion of Yeshua, HaMashiach, the Messiah. Right? So that's what this time period is for. Okay? So when you're doing your chronology and you try to lump this together, you're going to have a problem, and you're going to do all kinds of mental backflips and try to go to these archaeological sources and do all of this confusing things that you don't need to do. All you need to do is find out the difference of time between the proclamation of King Cyrus and the proclamation of Artaxerxes. And if you can find out the difference of time, then you can see that there were 7 weeks, and then you can define how long the gap was, and then you can define the actual starting point for the 483 years. And I believe when you do that, it makes perfect sense that that would have been the time that Jesus was crucified. And really, it's kind of interesting that this had been here all this time, right? And you'd think that people would know back then that, hey, this is coming close to the end of the 62 weeks. The Messiah is about to appear on the scene. Because it talks about the Messiah being cut off, where there has to be a Messiah for a Messiah to be cut off. So you think that would be ding, ding, ding. Hey, we're right around the time that's about to take place. Well, the wise men did figure it out. That's why they were looking That we're looking for him. That's what they saw, the star, and they followed the star to find the Messiah. That's why they were doing that. So they did figure it out. And also there were some other people who kind of sort of figured it out because King Herod wanted to know about it. Right? So King Herod kind of somehow knew in very vague terms that the Messiah was about to appear. And he wanted to kill the Messiah. Of course, he was being led by Satan to do that. So anyway, but the rest of the Israelites, if they did know, they didn't really tell the people, And then of course you got I can't remember his name. The one who wanted to see the Messiah's face before he died. He knew that it was about to take place. So there were some people who knew that it was about to happen, right? But either it was being suppressed, that the Pharisees and Sadducees didn't want the word to get out, right? Or maybe a lot of them just didn't know the scriptures very well, because Jesus was actually correcting, especially the Sadducees, saying you do err not knowing the scriptures. He's saying you don't even know the scriptures, right? You're not a good student of the scriptures. Okay, so anyway, that's kind of like a side trail, but that's what these first two time periods are for: building of the temple, right? The starting of the wall and the streets, and to show when the Messiah would be crucified. And I would say that this is a really good ministry tool that you could use when witnessing to Orthodox Jews, to show that this is a prophecy. And it wasn't, this is where I think it comes in very, very relevant to who gave the prophecy. Because Orthodox Jews are really good at brushing aside these men. So, well, he's a man and he could be wrong. We have had false prophets. There has been false prophets. And you really can't dispute that. Yeah, there have been false prophets. So if they want to call Daniel a false prophet, then they can. They can do that. But what you cannot do is you cannot call an angel of God a false prophet if he's truly an angel of God. Unless you want to go to the extreme and say that he was a demon. Right? And you really have to go against God's word to say something that drastic. Okay? Because God's word makes it clear that this Gabriel, this angelic being, was from God. He was from God. He was not a false prophet. Everything he said was faithful and true. Okay? So I believe this could be a really good thing to use with an Orthodox Jew. Now you have to show patience, and you have to not let the conversation go a million miles an hour like conversations tend to go. You got to have a slow and metered conversation with somebody. And if you have the patience to bear along with them, to explain it to them, and explain why they have to accept this prophecy, and why that there's no way they can deny the prophecy, because it was given by the angel Gabriel, right? And therefore it's from God, right? You can't just dismiss it. So it shows that the Messiah not only would appear, but the Messiah would be cut off. That he would be crucified. Because the Orthodox Jews, you have to understand, they think that there's two classes of prophecies about the Mashiach. They believe that there's the prophecies of the Mashiach, the Messiah, as being cut off, as being hung upon a tree. And they say, well, that's the prophecy that will happen if Israel is not good, if they're bad. And God wants to punish Israel, then God will kill their Messiah. And that's what they got in one class. And they have another class, they say, well, they also have these prophecies showing that the Mashiach is going to rule and reign. He's going to rule and reign with a rod of iron. And he's going to take Israel from all the parts of the earth and bring them back to Jerusalem. And they shall reign with him. And they say this is the prophecies that God's going to grant if the Jews are good. Right? Now, how do you know whether or not the Jews have been good or bad? I mean, they've been punished for a long time. Right? They've been in exile a long time. They've been struggling for a long time. Right? And so it's really subjective. It's really subjective. They don't want to hear the parts about him hanging on a tree because they know that's what we say about Jesus Christ. And they don't want to have any association with that at all. So they automatically assume that Israel is going to be good and the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox Jews are going to be that remnant that's going to save the people so that they get the good Messiah, not the bad Messiah. That they get the Messiah that rules and reigns, not the Messiah that suffers upon a tree. And it's been explained to them. It's been explained to them. They just reject the idea that both sets of prophecies are actually true. And the reason why they reject that idea is because by accepting that idea, they have to accept their Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. And they don't want to do that. They see accepting Jesus Christ as giving up Judaism. That's the way they see it. But that's not the way it is. It's not the way it is at all. So you have to have patience if you're going to share this as a way of sharing the gospel with someone. Make sure that you understand all of these issues. Make sure that you're ready for it and that you're not surprised by it when it happens. And that you just, you have to trust in the Holy Spirit and, trust that each individual is different. Okay? Some people might be unreachable, but others may not be. And if you just explain it to them in a very rational manner and explain it to them where they can understand it and see it, then that could open them up for the gospel. Okay? And so it's definitely something worth seeking after. So I just wanted to explain that that's what this is really, really good for. Because it shows that the Messiah would be cut off, that he would die upon a tree, that he would suffer for the people. That he is the one that Isaiah 53 is about. It's about him. It's not about the ultra-Orthodox remnant. It's not about them because they have sinned. And it's clear in Isaiah 53 that the one who's the suffering servant has not sinned. Okay? So that's important. Anyhow, we should move on. So those are the first two time periods. Okay? Okay. Looks like a lot of this I've already covered. All right. Okay, let's go back to Daniel 9, 26 and 27. Or actually, we're still there. Okay, good. Now, we're going to talk about the final week. Okay. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. And the reason why it gets a little tricky is because you have to understand that Hebrew and Greek, they don't have the same sentence structure that we have in modern day English. It's a different language. They're different languages. And in a lot of ways, completely foreign to the English dynamic. Okay? So the whole idea of having a sentence and a period that ends your sentence and punctuation marks, things like that to classify and identify things in a way that your brain can process the information in a more efficient manner. Those things they simply do not exist in the Hebrew and in the Greek. It's a whole different way of thinking. Okay, so I just want to start off by saying that. It says, after the Messiah being cut off, but not for himself, right? So he wasn't killed because of anything he had done wrong, okay? But he actually was sacrificed for the people, and so their sins might be forgiven. That's what happened. And he himself was blameless in everything. Completely blameless. Okay, and it says, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, now that's a little different. Okay, now the people of the prince, this prince is not talking about the Messiah. The people of the prince is talking about the Antichrist, the false Messiah, the false Mashiach. Okay? That's what this prince is. It says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with the flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Now, this has actually already taken place. This has actually taken place in 70 A.D. when the temple was destroyed. It was destroyed by Titus, and he came in and laid siege on Jerusalem. And the zealots were trapped inside the city, and they couldn't get out. And they stayed there for a long time, and there was starvation and things that happened. Actually, there's a point where he withdrew, and there was a time where some had escaped before they brought the soldiers back and laid siege again to it. Right? So there was a two-part siege that took place during this time. And so that's really interesting how that took place. And the ones that stayed, you can read about it. It's a historical record, a historical count by Josephus. So Josephus, a Jewish historian, he wrote about it, and he gave some very gory details about it, actually, different things that took place. But this had already taken place, right? The people of the prince, the people of the Antichrist. Now, you have to understand that there's the difference when I say of the Antichrist and the Antichrist himself. Okay? There is an Antichrist spirit, then there's the actual man of the Antichrist. Right? And there is a difference. Right? The spirit of Antichrist has been with us since the beginning of the church. So since the church began, there was already a spirit of Antichrist already in the world. And it's this spirit of Antichrist that Titus was following and commanding all of his troops to destroy the temple and the city and to take the Jews captive. And there's the whole history on that. But this was done by the people of the Antichrist, of the spirit of Antichrist. So you had the spirit of Antichrist already in the world at the same time that Christianity began. Okay? We had already covered that previously. So this is why it says the people of the prince, the people of the spirit of the Antichrist. So this actually has already taken place, this part of it. Right? And it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Now, this has not happened. So this is the part that has not happened. Now we've shifted from the spirit of Antichrist, which already took place, and it came with a flood, and onto the end of the war desolations are determined. Right? So there was a war that that there was being waged right there, and then there's actually, in a sense, there's been a spiritual war happening ever since against the Jewish people. They've been in exile ever since. They are still in exile. Okay, so they're still suffering during this diaspora, or this departure from Jerusalem. Now they are returning in some numbers, but they have not completely and fully and utterly returned. And I don't believe that they actually will until Jesus returns. Okay? But there is still quite a few Jews living in America and other places that have not relocated to Israel. And they don't have no plans to do so because of all the war and the fighting and the turmoil and bombings and all these other things that we hear about. And it's really interesting how President Trump has started a peace initiative that within the next 4 years, they could actually end up with peace in the Middle East. All right, so I don't know if that's in direct correlation with what we're seeing in Daniel 9:27. I don't know. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that this flood and the war of desolations and all that stuff, that's something that's still going on, right? That started back then, and they're still going on, okay? But now in verse 27, it shifts over to the actual person of the Antichrist, or the actual man of the Antichrist. Whenever he confirms a covenant for 1 week. And this 1 week is the final week of the 70 weeks prophecy given by the angel Gabriel. It's the final week. Okay? So this is the starting point. The starting point for the final week is what? The Antichrist, the person of Antichrist, and he's not going to call himself Antichrist. He's not going to show him and say, hey, I'm the Antichrist, and I'm going to make this covenant for 7 years with Jerusalem. It's not going to be like that. But this person who is the man of Antichrist will be the one who declares peace in the Middle East for a period of 7 years. Now, whether or not this person says it's only for 7 years doesn't really matter, because it's only going to be for 7 years. It's like, I declare peace from this day forward, right, in the Middle East. Once that happens, that final week begins. Whether he uses the vernacular of 7 years or not doesn't matter. Whenever he declares peace, and that there's a covenant, there's a contract, there's an agreement that there is peace now from now on, right? That's going to start the last final week. You know, I could say I start peace from now on, and it makes it sound like it's going to be from now on. Then all of a sudden we're just kind of going along. Then all of a sudden Jesus comes back and cuts it off right at the 7 year period. How long did it last? Did it last from now on, or did it just last for 7 years? So there you go. You have to kind of like make sure that you're thinking about it properly. So if you're waiting around for someone to say, I'm going to make this agreement with Israel for 7 years, that might not transpire that way. It might just say that we have an agreement and there is now peace in the Middle East, and it might just look just like that. Right? No time period given. Okay? So I just want to make sure you understand that. But according to Scripture, it says, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That's how long it's going to last. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So that means that there's going to be sacrifices taking place in the temple. That means there's going to be a third temple. Okay? And there's going to be sacrifices given in that temple. And, so he's going to start a covenant of peace. There's going to be a temple, right? That's going to start the final week, right? And he's going to cause the sacrifices to cease around the middle of that 7 year period. So in about, 3.5 years or so, he's going to stop the sacrificing. He's going to come in and almost like break the peace agreement, right? Because the peace agreement is going to be used for this man of Antichrist to gain power and influence and control. And then in the middle, he's going to say, okay, cuts it off. And then, of course, he's going to walk in and stand in the temple and the the most holy place and declare himself to be God. Right? And we'll get into that a little bit more detail later on in the study. I'm just giving you the highlights here. The highlights. Right? So, in the midst of the week, you shall cause the sacrificing and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So when he comes in and he shows himself for who he really is in the middle of the 7-week period, about 3.5 years or so after the peace has been declared, it's going to be desolation and consummation. Right? He's going to take over. Right? It's going to be no more the Jews worshiping the God of heaven. He's going to want the Jews to worship him. So all of that will be desolate. So that is the final week. So whenever actual peace is declared, right? So far we have a covenant, right? It does go, whoa, that kind of raises some eyebrows. There is a covenant for the purpose of peace 4 years from now. There is that, but there is no actual peace yet. There's a lot of diplomatic things that has to happen within that 4 years for that covenant that's currently in place to be realized. Right? But whenever it is realized, and there is actual peace there, that a temple can be built, right? And then they're declared that now we have peace, peace and safety. And then that's when that final 7-year period begins. That's the starting point of that time period, the third time period of the 70 weeks prophecy. Okay. And let's just read a couple verses on that. I kind of skimmed through Matthew 24. Verses 21 through 22. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. For the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So this is one of the reasons why I say that he might not declare an actual 7-year peace agreement. So, okay, we're going to have peace for 7 years, and everybody's going to agree with it. It might not look that way, because the reason why I say it might not look that way, because it says that Jesus' return is shortening the time to 7 years. That he's shortening the time so that the elect shall be saved, so that they're not completely wiped out, because in the middle of after about the 3.5 year or so mark, not only is he going to declare himself to be God and demand to be worshipped by everyone, including the Jews, he's going to be persecuting those who defy him, namely Christians, right? Namely actual Christian believers. And he's going to be after them. And he's not going to be after the nominal Christians who go along with the system and do everything that the government tells them to do. And if they happen to stumble across a sermon that offends too many people, they just say, oh, I'm sorry, and then they change it, and they apologize for it, and then they move on. He's not going to be after them, right? But he is going to be after those who are not compromising on the truth and refuse to worship him. He is going to be after them. So he'd be after the actual elect. So if it wasn't for Jesus coming back to make it a 7-year period, then all of us would be physically wiped out. There'd be no one surviving. Right? So that's the reason for ending that week. That if Jesus doesn't come when he's going to come, if he were to make it last 10 years or whatever, there'd be no one left to come for. We'd all be dead. Okay? Except for the wicked. So that's why I say that it may not be designated as a 7-year period from the beginning. But it is going to be designated as a covenant of peace. And then Jesus is going to shorten that, because if he doesn't, we would all of our flesh would all be wiped out. So that's one of the reasons why I say that. And verses 27 through 28. For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. So this is in reference to Revelation 19, 11 through 21. And that's what this is in reference to. And just for the sake of time, I'm just going to give that passage as something that you can look up. Revelation 19, verses 11 through 21. And you can see that this is talking about Jesus' second coming. And there's a lot of people that's going to be killed. There's going to be a lot of carcasses. And there's going to be a lot of blood. And then there's going to be a lot of birds coming to feed on the flesh. So that's what this is in reference to, which is also in reference to prophecies from the Old Testament that speak about the very same events, right? So that's a complete other teaching all by itself. But I just want to say that that's what this Matthew 27 or Matthew 24, 27 through 28, that's what that is in reference to. And then verse 29 through 31. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they that see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Notice that everyone's going to see him coming back. It's not some secret coming. It's something that everyone will actually see with their eyes. Verse 31, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The four winds is like the four directions, north, south, east, and west, right? So the entire planet. Okay, that's what that's referring to. So that is the rapture, immediately after the tribulation of those days. So that's what happens at the conclusion of this 7-year period. You know, it begins with the covenant of peace in the Middle East with Israel, which they can have a temple, right? And I believe the temple will actually be built probably before the actual peace has been declared. I think it's going to be part of the process. Part of the process for gaining the peace will be the building of the temple, because everything seems to indicate that the temple's already going to be there at the beginning of this week. At the beginning of this 7-year period, there's every indication that the temple will already be in place, right, before this peace has been declared, before this covenant has been solidified. So I believe it's going to be a process. I believe that part of the process is going to be the building of the temple, and we very well could be at the beginning of that process now. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be terrified of that. It's going to happen, whether we want it to happen during our lifetime or not doesn't matter. It's going to happen when it happens, whether we like it or not. But you shouldn't despair. You shouldn't say, oh, woe is me, what am I going to do? And start living according to the fear of death, which is what the sinners do. We don't do that. But what we need to do is we need to look up, because our redemption draws nigh. Our redemption draws near. So we should be actually excited when these things start to happen. Not fearful or terrified, but we should actually be excited. And yeah, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. But we should still be excited about it. Okay? And that all comes down to counting the cost. And a lot of times people like to say, oh yeah, you got to count the cost. And it sounds almost like a gimmick to a lot of people. It almost sounds like a catchphrase that people like to use, just like some kind of a mantra, a banner or something that they like to hear. It's a phrase that makes you feel good. That, oh yeah, I'm a real Christian. I count the cost, right? Well, actually, counting the cost is painful. To count the cost requires you to experience loss and sacrifice, and that's what counting the cost is about. Is that you're willing to give up everything gladly and cheerfully for the Lord, because the Lord is worthy. That's counting the cost. And you can look at the Fox's Book of Martyrs and look at some things that the early church has endured. There's an account that I remember reading talking about someone who was actually skinned alive and crucified. And while he was skinned alive and crucified, he was on the cross with no skin on his body. And you have to realize that he'd be in, all of his nerves endings exposed like that. He'd be in total pain. It'd be hard to imagine how much pain that person would be in. And you know what that man did? Did he cry and say, woe is me? Is that what he said? No. He actually preached the gospel to the people until he died. So they skinned him alive and they crucified him, and he still found the strength to preach the gospel. Right? That's what counting the cost looks like. It's not pretty. Counting the cost means you're willing to endure anything because God is worthy. And even to preach the gospel to those that are doing it to you, so that maybe they might be saved. Not even thinking about the pain and the suffering that you're currently going through. And none of us that I know of in this country has really come close to suffering like that. Yeah, I've been threatened by police, and like they were going to arrest me, and all these different things, and had to go to court cases and stuff. And I've never actually been arrested for the gospel in this country. I was arrested for the gospel in Italy because I was preaching at the what's that called? The Vatican. I was preaching at the Vatican, and the Roman Catholics didn't want to hear the gospel. So I ended up in jail for that. But I was only in jail for 7 hours, and they eventually let us go. And yeah, that is some level of persecution. I've been beaten up for the preaching of the gospel. People punching me in the face. I've had people take these energy drinks that are unopened. And an unopened energy drink is like a big brick, a metal brick. And I've been hit in the head repeatedly, where these people would be attacking me and they'd hit me in the head and I'd be stunned. And I don't know why it didn't knock me out. But then before I really got my bearings, they'd pick the can up and they'd throw and hit me in the head with it again. Multiple times. And I don't know if I got any concussions from that or not. I never went to the doctor on that. But that was some suffering I did for the gospel. And other things, and that is quite severe, but I lived through it. And, all I have to say is that there is a special type of grace. It wasn't that I didn't feel the pain. I did feel the pain, but somehow God got me through it. And I didn't have a nasty attitude about it. I was actually rejoicing that the Lord counted me worthy to suffer for his name's sake. That's what I was doing. Okay, and that's what Christians do when they actually count the cost. So counting the cost hurts. Okay, it hurts. It costs you dearly to count the cost. And if your idea of counting the cost doesn't cost you anything, then you haven't counted anything. You think you've counted the cost, but all you're doing is just trying to make yourself feel better, right? We're not here for psychological therapy. Okay, that's not why we're here. We're not here to just make ourselves feel good at all times. That's not why we're here. We're here for actual righteousness' sake. We're here for the Lord Jesus Christ, that God would have his way in our lives. And yeah, there's plenty of blessings and there's plenty of things to rejoice and to celebrate in this life. There's plenty of wonderful things that happens for us as Christians in this life. But there's also a lot of painful things that happen too. And there are plenty of places in other parts of the world where they are suffering like that. They really do count the cost. And I could maybe talk about some of those things that I know about. But they're just as gruesome as what I've said so far. And they do it joyfully. And there are some who don't do it joyfully. There are some who begin to suffer and then they give up. They renounce Jesus and they get set free. Then they start going to the other churches that will accept them after they do something like that, right? So they didn't count the cost, right? Once it started hurting really bad, they bailed out, right? Well, we can't do that. There is no, I'll just bail out so I don't have to suffer this suffering, and I'll denounce Jesus, then Jesus will just forgive me later. No, it doesn't work that way. You could denounce Jesus in a situation like that, and you can become reprobate. So don't test the Lord. Do not test the Lord your God. So anyway, just wanted to talk about that because it's going to be very relevant once this week begins. The first half of the week is not going to be that big of a deal, so to speak. It's going to be peaceful in a lot of ways, but everything's going to come to a crashing end at the midpoint. And then the last half of that 7-year period is going to be very grueling. But like I said, even knowing all this stuff, don't go despairing. Don't go saying, oh, wow, what are we going to do? Look up, for our redemption draws near. So no matter what kind of suffering we have to go through, just keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your eyes on the prize. And don't give up no matter what. And actually joyfully receive whatever suffering that comes our way. And until you have that kind of faith, you're just not going to make it. So right now, during the time that we have right now, before all of this stuff comes to pass, now's the time to build up our faith in such a way that it'll be a faith that can endure through anything. Now's the time to do that. You need to stop putting it off till later. You only have today. Okay? So now's the time to build the right kind of faith that will endure through anything. It all comes down to love. Love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But what is love? Right? Love is, people sing about it sometimes, walking through fire without blinking. That's love. Suffering so for others is love. I've said this before, a pregnant woman who, she has given birth and she has her newborn baby and then the baby grows up a little bit and she's a good mama and she has her baby on her side, and that baby is causing her back to hurt, and she's still holding the baby on her side, and she's kind of suffering a little bit of pain and everything like that, holding that baby. But what's she going to do? Is she's just going to throw the baby on the ground and say, ow, that hurts? No, she's suffering. She's suffering because she loves her child, right? She loves her child, and she'll suffer a little bit of pain so that she has the joy of holding her child, even if she has to suffer a little bit of pain in the process. So that's another illustration of love, of suffering, right? So, love isn't always just feel good all the time. And, if you have that kind of love, you just have a love of convenience. And it's just a selfish, convenient self-love. And really what you're saying is you only love yourself. Because once things get a little bit too uncomfortable, you're out of here. That's not love. I've had a lot of friends in my life, and there has been a few friends that I could say are real friends. That when the going gets tough and I really need them, they're there for me. I've had friends like that. I've also had friends that when everything was going great, they were always around. And when things got tough, sorry man, I'm out of here. And you look around and they're all gone. Well, they were never friends. They had no love for me, right? Once it come to suffer a little bit, then they were out of here. They don't want to suffer at all because they're only focused on themselves. And what did Jesus say? Jesus said, you are my friend if you do whatsoever I command you. And if you have to suffer a little bit for Jesus' sake and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of here. Are you a friend of Jesus? No, you're not. Okay? So we need to have that faith now. We need to build that faith now. Now's the time. Now in this time of relative peace that we're in. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now. But it's going to get worse. Right? It might get worse in our lifetime. Are you ready? Will your faith stand up during that time? Will you endure through anything? Do you have that focus on Jesus Christ? Do you have that close relationship with Jesus Christ that you will do anything for him? Okay? And if you're not there, you need to get there now because the door is closing. The door is closing. And you don't want to find yourself in the middle point of that 7-year period and not be ready. You don't want to find yourself in that place. You want to get ready before then. You want to get ready now. Okay? So that's what counting the cost really is, and we need to do it every day. Every day, count the cost, and that Jesus is worthy. And we love him with everything. Love him to walk through fire without blinking. Love him to suffer any kind of suffering. Gladly and cheerfully. Right? Relying upon him for strength the entire way through. So that's the kind of faith we need to have. So that is the 70 weeks prophecy. 3 time periods. There's 3 start times, right? And they have 3 different purposes. The ending of the 7 weeks period is the temple was built. And it began at the proclamation to build the temple by Cyrus, King Cyrus. The 62 weeks prophecy began with the proclamation from Artaxerxes, the king, so that Nehemiah could go back and he can build the wall and the street. And that began the 62-week period, which was 483 years. And by the end of that was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. That marked the end of that time period. And then the third time period begins at a proclamation of peace in Israel, where there's already an existing temple. And then at the finale of that is when Jesus comes back. That's the end of that 7 years. And we're going to get in more detail on all of these things. We are going to construct a timeline, and we're going to start going through the Bible and start putting things on the timeline where they go. And that's what's going to take the longest time. Getting the timeline in place, understanding the timeline. There's a little bit we have to go through before we can get that done. But then after we get that done, then we have to start putting events on the calendar where they go. And that's probably that last part is going to take the longest part. Okay, so that's what's coming, and that's all I have for today. All right. Oh wow, I never did put the Bible. This whole time I was going through the Bible thing, and I never even had it up there until now. Okay, so there you have it. Technical difficulty.